Hi and welcome back to Plant-Based Tea with me, Farm Girl Goes Vegan. A non-judgy space where you can come and have a cup of tea with me when I spill the tea on topics that I don't really often see discussed in detail in the vegan and plant-based movement. Just a note to say, if you are watching this on video, I've moved flat, so you might notice the background looks a little bit different. So I'm workshopping this new setup, bear with me. But to be fair, I kind of like it because it feels like you're at home with me, which you are, so welcome. So in this episode, I am taking things personally, as in I'm going to spill the tea about what it was like to grow up on a farm, the moment I told my family that I'd gone vegan and how that went, eek! What it's like to be vegan now in a non-vegan family, and just all the general challenges I had along the way. But before I forget, the tea I'm drinking today is chocolate digestive tea from Bird and Blend. And I'm going to let you in on a tiny secret here. I don't very often sign up to marketing emails because I end up just unsubscribing, being like, oh, this is annoying. But I specifically sign up to the Bird and Blend email so that I can keep an eye on when their sales are coming. And I saw that they had a 50% sale. And of course, I had to get the tea that originally introduced me to Bird and Blend, which was this one, the chocolate digestive. Perfection in a tea. It's like really rich and chocolatey, but also biscuity. Bird and Blend are tea wizards and I genuinely don't know how they do it, but just whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Banger. And also, this teacup actually belonged to my grandmother and was given to me when she passed away kind of semi-suddenly last year. She used to love collecting beautiful tea sets and we would always call in to her and Granda's house to have a cup of tea and biscuits with them. And my grandparents, to be honest, are largely part of the reason that I came up with this concept for a podcast, because it's just such a common thing to do in Northern Ireland. You just call in for a cup of tea, the biscuit tin comes out, everybody joins in, chats, great fun. So I feel really grateful and privileged to have this teacup and this tea set and be able to use them as part of my podcast. And crazily, this cup says on it that it was made in 1836. 1836. What? Like, I can't get my head around that date. But yeah, I feel super grateful, very privileged to have this cup with me. And it feels like in some way I can remember my grandmother. So I just wanted to share that with you. Whew. But before the emotions overwhelm me, I'm just going to continue on with the topic in hand. Let's go. As I mentioned, I want to talk about my experience growing up on a farm, what I've learned from it, how my perspective has changed since going vegan, what it's like now, and then I'm gonna at the end go through some of the comments I received from people on my socials and kind of debunk those with you. So let's go right back to the start. If you follow me via social media, then you'll know some of this already, so feel free to fast forward to the next section. But if you find me via my podcast, then strap in for the full deets. I was born in Northern Ireland and I grew up on a dairy farm. Yep, a dairy farm. My dad is a farmer's son of a farmer's son of a farmer's son. It's a huge part of my family's lineage and history, so this was completely normal to me. I didn't grow up thinking anything was out of the ordinary about my dad's job. It was literally just that, my dad's job. As far as I knew, he may as well have been going to an office every day. My childhood was as idyllic as you can imagine, plenty of space to run around in, a farmhouse on top of like a little hill, which was just above the actual dairy farm itself. It was charming, it was spacious, and Dad would kind of come and go from the farm, but he would always be home for meal times around the family dinner table. You know, the meat and 2 veg kind of set up, the usual. We were very, very lucky. I knew that the cows were there. I saw them often. I would sometimes help my dad with herding them in from the field so they could get milked. Other times he would let me and my siblings feed them. And sometimes, if we were lucky, we would get to see a calf being born. And this was a super special experience. So just to reiterate, nothing was ever hidden from me. I saw it all. What I didn't see, or rather what I didn't connect, was why the cows were actually producing milk, or how. I guess in a naive way, maybe I just thought that there was a certain type of cow that produced milk. A dairy cow, right? Or maybe what they were eating made them produce milk. I used to see those TV adverts, you know, that they had back in the day where it was like cows running around in the fields and then there was milk. So I think I kind of just conflated those two things as though they were cause and effect. And to be fully transparent, I just didn't really think much about it. It was just how things were. There were these animals, they were there, they produced milk, and then in turn it got sold to a big creamery who sent a huge lorry once a week to collect the milk. That was the process and that was our lives. And it was also the lives of all my friends from school because we all went to a small countryside school and all the other children were also from farms. Some of my friends' parents actually kept like a bucket of milk in the fridge to drink from, and then they would go and collect more whenever it ran out directly from the farm. Which in my family we didn't actually do that, but that was kind of commonplace. Bucket of milk in the fridge, drink it, away you go. So hopefully that kind of explains a bit of the picture for you and the context we're talking about, because it all sounds like normal. It sounds lovely, right? So fast forward to 2017. I was hungover on New Year's Day, as many of us are, and I decided for some unknown reason to subject myself to a documentary called Cowspiracy. Up until this point, I had literally no idea that there was a connection between environmental damage and animal agriculture. I had no clue. This information honestly blew me away. I was shook. But initially I thought, okay, well, you know what it's like when you watch a documentary, like maybe it's a little bit biased, maybe they're just exaggerating what they're talking about. I know what I'll do. I'll go away, I'll do my own research, and I'll basically prove the documentary wrong, and I'll just be able to go on living my life as I had been living it. So I did. I went away and I read articles, papers, studies, data, anything I could get my hands on. And I thought this was going to be it. I was going to be fine. I was going to move on back to usual life. But of course, you know that is not what happened. Everything I read further backed up what was said in the documentary, and further beyond the environmental factors, this sent me on a road of discovering about the ethics of animal agriculture. Those two big ticket items together cemented the belief that I had to be vegan, and I wasn't going to be able to ignore what I'd learned. I kind of felt like I was the sort of person who, if I discovered some sort of information that was different to what I had believed, that I would accept that. I wouldn't just ignore it and try to bury my head in the sand. So here we are, 8 years later. But that didn't mean I just told my family straight away. Are you mad? No. I'm going to give a little bit more detail here about the extent of the farming traditions in my family so you can understand why I didn't just, happily jump into telling them, yay, I'm vegan now. So earlier I explained a tiny bit about my dad and his background, but to give a little bit more context, sadly his father actually passed away when my dad was in his late teens. So him taking on the role of the farm and overseeing the farm and actually being a farmer came a lot sooner than what he was expecting. His mum, my granny, also used to have her own backyard egg business, so she actually raised hens and sold their eggs to local people. Then on my mum's side, although she didn't grow up in the countryside, her dad, my granda, worked for the Ministry of Agriculture, and he was involved with setting the meat safety standards and slaughter standards as far as I'm aware. So it wasn't just that my dad was a farmer. It was deeply ingrained in my family that eating animals and farming animals for food was a completely normalized and acceptable thing to do. So I'm sure you can imagine my fear and trepidation when making the announcement that I was now vegan. What I ended up actually doing was just not telling my family for an entire year. Around that time, I usually only went home once a year, so to be fair, it was actually quite easy to conceal. I got used to being vegan myself without having to explain it to anyone. I just learned how to eat well and pretended to my family like everything was how it had been. But then it came to going home for a family party, which I think, looking back, I'm pretty sure it was my grandparents' 60th wedding anniversary. And so my mum called up to discuss what sort of food we were having, who was contributing what everyone was making, and so on. And so she, of course, listed off and rhymed off everything she was making. And of course, that included meat and dairy, as usual. So I kind of just blurted out, well, I'm not really eating meat or dairy right now. And I just remember silence. And I was thinking, oh no, here we go, what's she gonna say? And then my mum just said, why? So naturally, I stumbled through some very ineloquent explanation of my new choices and how I wasn't intentionally targeting Dad personally. It was more about the grander scale of animal agriculture as a whole, the system, the destruction to the planet, our home that we need to live on. It didn't go well, let's just put it that way. But she did eventually come to understand what I was trying to say, but I was basically told, good luck for the party, because it's hosted by my grandparents and they were not going to be quite so understanding, which to be fair, I already knew. At the party, my grandma was kind of just very worried for me and scared that I would waste away, as she kept saying, without any animal products. But the reason I tell this story is to explain that my approach to veganism wasn't exactly smooth sailing. It wasn't an easy starting point, but for me, once I knew that information, it would have been impossible for me to go back knowing what I now knew. Of course, when I went home over the years after going vegan, there were various heated conversations at the dinner table, outbursts from various family members, the usual, including one where my granddad actually slammed his fist on the table and shouted, "Just eat the bloody meat!" And of course there were the usual jokes. How do you know somebody's vegan? They'll tell you, ha ha ha, etc, etc. But over time it kind of just became the norm. I was helped out a little bit by the fact that my brother and his girlfriend at the time ended up watching What the Health, another vegan documentary, and they cut out meat. So then there were 3 of us at family meals, so it made it a bit easier. And eventually my sister also cut out meat. Everyone for their own reasons, but it made it much more normalized in my family and less like I was just this weird person who didn't eat meat. Now, my mum will message me to ask what vegan food she can get in for when I'm visiting, which just happened a couple of weeks ago. Dad will often send pictures of vegan things that he's tried or vegan meals that he's had out, and they'll always keep a stock of vegan magnums and twisters in the fridge. It's little steps, and I'm not saying that my whole family's gonna go vegan or that my mum and dad will ever actually go vegan, but the change in their eating habits is definitely noticeable. But I want to swing a curveball and speak more about farming itself and the aspects that I don't think a lot of people realise or truly grasp. When I speak about the dairy industry, I often get a lot of heavy pushback telling me I don't know anything about it, so I shouldn't comment. But I beg to differ. I know plenty, and I want to share with you so that you can be informed too. And please remember, this isn't me saying that you have to go vegan right now or even ever, but it's my way of sharing what I know so that you are armed with the info that isn't readily shared and you can make your own choices. One thing I've noticed is that I don't actually know anyone who openly admits to buying from a factory farm. And yet 99% of farmed animals in the US are on factory farms and 85% of farmed animals in the UK are on factory farms. That means that the majority of products being produced are from factory farms, so either people genuinely don't know that they're buying from large scale or industrial farms, or they're just not willing to admit it. And just so we're in agreement on what factory farming is, here is a definition. Factory farming is a system of rearing livestock using highly intensive methods by which poultry, pigs or cattle are confined indoors under strictly controlled conditions. People will often comment on my posts to say that they buy from local farms, so that's therefore ethical and sustainable. So I want to jump into that, but I'll focus on dairy because that's where I have the most relevant knowledge. Let's say that every person did buy from a local, organic dairy farm. That sounds like that's probably going to be the best of the best, right? A small, local organic farm, and that must be where the cows are treated really nicely and have lovely lives. You know, the happy cows that we see on TV ads. And to be fair, I too probably would have been inclined to believe that, except that I've come to understand one key part of the dairy industry. The system is the system. Once you know how the system works, you realize that there is not really a way to have an ethical dairy farm. Why? Well, because in order for any mammal to make milk, they have to first be pregnant and have a baby to feed. And what do mammals feed their babies? Milk, of course, as humans do. Once I clicked that in my head, I was like, I see it now. So it doesn't actually matter how local, organic, sustainable it is. The truth is the truth. It's mother's milk meant for their babies. Like, is that possibly the best marketing or rebranding to exist for an industry? Making the milk of a bovine mammal somehow be reimagined as human milk, our milk for us. Then the next obvious question that often comes up is, well, if the milk is for a baby cow, where do the babies go then? And that is one thing I actually have first-hand experience of. My siblings and I used to be allowed to name the calves when they were born, and we loved it. We loved going to see them, we loved letting them suck onto our fingers, but what I never connected the dots on is why we never saw the babies with their mothers. They were either in a holding pen on their own within the first 24 hours after they were born, or they were moved into individual pens with other babies that had been born that week or month. These were the female calves. The male calves were sold straight away usually, presumably for veal. And I never understood my dad's disappointment at a male calf being born, but now I get it. Male calves are useless to the dairy industry because they can't produce milk, so he would have to sell them for very little profit, and they would never become part of the milk producing herd like the female calves would. Looking back on it, it's tough because now I recognize what was happening and why. Of course, I know that it's a business and that cows were part of this system and business, but there's no real other way to look at it than exploiting the reproductive organs of an animal so that we can drink their milk. I want to just recap on the timeline of a dairy cow so that we can have it very clear. The dairy cow is impregnated, usually by artificial insemination to try to modify your chances of the calf being a female. Then the dairy cow falls pregnant, carries her calf for 9 months, which is the same as a human. The dairy cow gives birth, and the calf is taken away within 24 hours. The cow is then added into the dairy producing herd to be milked. Meanwhile, the calves are raised. When they're old enough, around 1 year, they're then also impregnated so that they can join the herd like their mothers. This cycle repeats until the cow is too tired and too weak to produce another calf. At that point, she'll be sent for slaughter to be turned into cheap meat like mince, all the while being replaced by their offspring so that the herd is maintained. Yikes! It is a lot to take in, and it's something that took me quite a while to get my head around, even though I grew up in that environment. One interesting thing is I do actually hear quite a lot from mothers who realise the connection between motherhood and dairy after breastfeeding their own children. A lot of people who say that that was the final push to help them give up dairy because they realised about the inherent cruelty baked into the system. It's just one to think about. I'm not even saying you have to go vegan today, but thinking about the wider picture and the systems we were bought into without even realising can definitely help. So now that I've gone through the main parts of the story and how my perspective of dairy farming has shifted over time, I want to finish with a couple of the comments that I regularly get, and I'm going to debunk them. So this one I love. For some reason, people are obsessed with saying, you didn't really grow up on a farm and you're just doing this for show and for social media engagement. Or they say, your dad isn't a farmer, stop lying. This one makes me laugh so much because isn't it funny that someone would believe that I would make up something like this? Like, for what gain? Like, I'm not sure if you've noticed, but it's not an easy path being a vegan content creator. I deal with like online verbal abuse from trolls most days for speaking up about animal agriculture. So I don't think I would just do that for the fun of it if it wasn't the truth. Also, technically you are right about my dad, but only because he's retired. So technically he is no longer a farmer, but he was a dairy farmer from the age of 19 until a few years ago. If you want to speak to him to confirm, just let me know and I'll get him on the line. In fact, should I just call him now while recording, see if he picks up?
Hello.
Hello, Dad. I'm just currently recording a podcast, so I've got you on speaker.
Okay.
People basically comment for me all the time and say that they don't think that you were actually a farmer.
Okay.
So I just want you to confirm for the recording that you were in fact a farmer. So what age did you start farming?
I started farming, well, really when I was 16.
Whoa!
But I was working on the farm before I went into school, and before I went to grammar school and that. Well, I was, I would have to have done work on the farm.
Okay.
But then when Dad died when I was 19, then I had to take over the place and sink or swim, basically. I mean, I was just left with this place and trying to make a living and trying to, eventually marry and bring up the children. So basically, it's been 44 years of my life.
44 years. Yo,
Yeah.
That's crazy. There you have it, straight from him himself. 44 years of farming. So hopefully that puts that one to rest. Moving on. So another comment that people do all the time, and this one I find very intriguing, is cows need to be milked or they die. That is just astonishing to me because isn't it just basic biology? Like, do you know any human, an adult human, who has died from stopping breastfeeding? Obviously, I know that cows can develop infections such as mastitis, which humans can also get, by the way, and left untreated, that could be bad, but that's assuming that you wouldn't treat it. If you don't milk a cow and it isn't feeding its young, then eventually the milk would just dry up in the same way that it does for humans. Cool. Okay, last one. If we didn't have animals on factory farms, then those animals would go extinct. This is such an interesting one to me because that's operating under the assumption that tomorrow all farms will close and the whole world goes vegan immediately, which, as I'm sure we're all aware, is not going to happen. We're not going to just halt a massive industry one day and then throw all the animals to the streets to just let them fend for themselves. What will happen is what's already happening, that slowly farms will have to close due to supply and the demand for these products decreasing over time. So less animals will be bred into existence to become dairy cows or for meat or, chickens for eggs, for example. Eventually those operations will cease to exist except for smaller, potentially organic facilities, and those products will be very niche. Animals who remain will live out their lives, I would say, probably in sanctuaries. And to me, it's much more preferable for animals to not be bred just to die for our taste preferences. So yeah, obviously those animals will become a lot less prevalent, but they wouldn't be extinct. Whew, so that is it for this episode. I'm going to wrap it up here, and I hope that has given you a bit of insight into my background, growing up on a farm, and the dairy farming system as a whole. We even got a little interlude from my dad. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you subscribe so that you can join for the next cup of plant-based tea with me, Farm Girl Goes Vegan. Okay, bye!